I challenge you to a duel.
Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Movie Duel podcast. My name is Peter and I am your host. On each episode of the Movie Duel podcast, we pick a subject based around films, and then myself and my co-host each pick a movie that we think best fits that subject. The only rule being that you can't pick a film that has already been discussed on the podcast. This time around, I'm going to be joined by Movie Duellist Nicole to discuss our choices for best mindfuck movie. But before we get into that, just a few points of order for this episode. And first and foremost, just some thanks for reposts over on X for the following people on our last episode. And this time around, they go to the Shoot the Hostage podcast, Right Stuff Reviews, Paul from Filmbusters, Jamie Russell, and Movie Drone podcast as well. Thank you very much, guys, for your continued reposts and retweets. It's very much appreciated. Just a reminder about how you can get in touch with us here at the Movie Duel podcast. You can follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Threads, and on X, where you can find us at Movie Duel Pod. Over on X / Twitter, you will also find the poll for this episode, so you can put your vote in for which choice of movie you agree with. And you can contact us on email at movieduelpodcast@gmail.com. And if you're looking for a little bit of extra Movie Duel bonus content, you can sign up to our Patreon for just £1 a month, and you'll be entitled to listen to our Movie Duellist roundtables, in which I'm joined by all four of the Movie Duellists to discuss a certain topic for that month. We should be either around the time of this episode dropping or very close to dropping our March roundtable, in which we talk about who we consider to be the most consistent director. So check that out. And also you can find more of the voices from the Movie Duel podcast over at the So-Called X-Files podcast, a brand new podcast that's been started by myself and movie duelist Vanessa Cordner, in which we break down some of our favourite episodes from the X-Files season by season and talk not just about some of the Monster of the Week episodes, but some of the mythology as a whole as well, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. So if you like the X-Files, which is obviously the greatest TV show ever made, then I would encourage you to head on over and check that out. We are on Facebook with that, and you can find it on all good podcast hosting platforms. And then finally, just a few notes about this episode. There will be spoilers for both films, and there will be strong language also. So I hope you enjoy episode 26 of the Movie Duel podcast.
What the fuck?
Okay, so welcome back to Nicole. Nicole, how are you today?
Oh, not terrible, which is good enough, you know. I was saying earlier off mic that my brain hurts after watching both of these movies yesterday. I waited much too long before getting in my rewatches. I had seen both movies before. I've actually talked about my movie on a previous podcast before. So I've seen that a couple of times, but not recently. And then I've seen your movie probably 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so this was a refresher, and oh goodness, they're challenging. They are challenging films.
They certainly are. I mean, I think I watched mine, and then about 2 days later I watched yours, and I'm glad I watched them in that order. Mm-hmm. But I mean, we'll get to that. How's the start of 2024 been for you?
Stressful. I have been planning a trip to Ireland for primarily family reasons, I'll say, but also once that family business is taken care of in the first couple of days, it will be my eldest sister and I jaunting around Ireland for a few days. And I'll be coming and meeting my movie duel co-hosts one of those days. I'll be popping over to London.
You will indeed, yes.
I'm very excited
Yeah.
to actually be face-to-face for a change, not over Zoom. So, yeah, so it's been planning, get my new passport. It's mine, my old one expired. So I've got all the arrangements done, finally. So.
Any trips to the cinema?
Trips to the cinema? I went to see Bottoms.
Oh, yeah.
The local art cinema was showing like the best of 2023.
All right.
Movies you may have missed. So we went to go see Bottoms, which is, I've heard it compared to like this generation's Heathers, and I don't think that's far off.
Oh, right, okay. I have heard a lot of good stuff. I think it's just landed on Prime over here, but I've not got around to watching it yet. But I've heard good things. Yeah,
it's more fun than Heathers, I would say. Heathers is dark. And yes, it's darkly funny, but it's also got a kind of grim undertone to it. And Bottoms doesn't have that
Very
grimness.
All right. Okay.
So it's a little bit lighter, which is nice. But it's also not one to watch with your parents or children.
Okay. Well, I don't think I'll be watching that with my children. We're into.
No, your children are not old enough.
We're well into Doctor Who binge now. So
excellent.
My daughter's just got into Doctor Who. She watched the 3 specials over Christmas, and she's obsessed. But couldn't understand why it was Christopher Eccleston. I said, well, we're watching from the start of the reboot, the 2003 reboot. So it was trying to explain the whole regeneration and things like that to her, but she's very happy now because we got to season 4 and Donna's back in it and David Tennant, so she's happy.
Excellent.
But she has been really enjoying it. We watched obviously season 3 had Blink, which is the first one the Weeping Angels are in, and she absolutely loved that. She's obsessed with it and she won't shut up about it.
Oh yeah, well it's terrifying and it's a very sticky brain idea. There's been so many. I watch a lot of gaming on YouTube, and there's been so many indie horror games made with that concept worked into them, where you have to keep looking at the opponent, or it'll sneak up on you. But I'm glad you're getting the kids into Doctor Who. You are going to backtrack and show them, Fourth Doctor, Best Doctor, Tom Baker, right?
I hope so at some point. Yes, I think it's a tough sell for a 9-year-old, I think, to go that far back. But I think if I just sort of creep back gently, I think, because growing up, I think, it's like James Bond. You have your James Bond, or
yes, you have your doctor that you grew up with.
And Sylvester McCoy was mine, and right before it ended, and they sort of stopped making them. And I'd be interested to show us some of those, because I mean, his first season was pretty poor, but then it really picked up despite the sort of diminishing budget that it had. It had some really interesting stories. So hopefully, when she's a little bit older, maybe when she's caught up, I'll sort of suggest that we dip back into some of the old stuff.
Yeah, maybe forgive some of the effects in the older one. I watched one not that long ago from the Tom Baker era. There was some, alien fungus or something on a space station, I think it was, and it was literally bubble wrap painted green.
Yeah.
It was very obviously bubble wrap.
I love it.
It's just like, oh wow, that's
well, and to sort of top off my triple bill of these 2 films, I also watched, because another podcast was covering it, I'd not seen it, was a film called Threads, which was a British film about...
I have not seen that. I've heard about
nuclear war.
We had The Day After here in the US. That was our big nuclear war scare TV movie.
Yeah. I would say it's bleaker than that. And that's saying something.
I believe it.
I would thoroughly recommend it. It's a very good, very well made film. And considering it was a BBC budget in early 80s, it looks pretty incredible.
Yeah.
It's certainly not a nice watch at all. But enough about the bleak films we've been watching, and more about the bleak films we've been watching for the podcast. So obviously last time you were here, we were discussing way back. Is it best comic book movie?
Best comic book movie that wasn't DC or Marvel.
Yes.
That was it. Then it was my turn to pick.
It was your turn to pick. So what subject did you pick for us this time?
I chose favorite mind-bending movies for PG-13, 15 rating sake.
Oh, I just put Mindfuck on.
You put asterisks in it, Mindfuck movies, ones that make your brain do extra work.
Yes. I mean, obviously it sort of fell to me to pick first, but did you have something in mind for this already, or was it something that you sort of thought was quite wide open? And
Well, I mean, I had what I had in mind was maybe a film that I hadn't seen yet. Maybe something that was surrealist that I had to think about. I really enjoy movies that don't hold your hand, where you've got to figure it out for yourself, and maybe some tricky things happen during the film, and you've got to put the pieces together yourself afterward.
Yeah.
I think I had wanted to see Holy Motors because I had heard that was sort of surrealist, and some people had trouble following it, and so I went and I saw that, and while it's definitely surrealist, heightened reality kind of thing. It's really just a series of vignettes. There's not much of a narrative tying it together. I would recommend it. I would recommend Holy Motors, but
yeah, I've heard a lot about it. It's not a film that I've seen. I was secretly kind of hoping that you would go for that because I've been wanting to watch it.
Well, you should still watch it. It's still fun, and you can pause after every little interaction. I think there's 11 or 12 little stories built into it. But like I said, I didn't have any trouble understanding what was going on. I wasn't sure why the things that were happening, but I could, I understood what I was watching and how that was happening. And I went online to find lists of the best mind-bending movies, and there's so many Christopher Nolan movies on it. And I would say, with the exception perhaps of Tenet, that I don't understand why they're on those lists. I was able to follow Inception perfectly well out of the gate.
Yeah.
And Interstellar and Tenet, I think it's the script's fault that it's a little difficult to follow at times.
I've still not seen Tenet. It's one of those that's sort of languishing on my watch list, but I know I'm going to need to be in a particular frame of mind to be able to concentrate on it, because I've heard that, as you say, it's full of mind-bendiness.
Yes. Yeah. So, I ended up, most of the ones on the short list were wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey
Wibbly-wobbly,
sort of
timey-wimey.
films.
Yes. Well, this is probably the closest I've got to recording an episode before I decided, because for a long time I had films like Memento and American Psycho, Jacob's Ladder was in the mix as well, and a couple of others as well. I think I just kept sort of pushing them out, at different ideas, because there is so much, and they're my kind of films. Like you, I like films that make you think, and films that are not necessarily just straight down the line. Yeah,
I'm really glad that you were looking at what I consider to be sort of the other side of that, which is just you're staring at the screen and thinking to yourself, "What is going on?" Whereas we're all looking at the screen and going, "When is going on? When?" What order is this happening in?
I think it's good to have these sort of wide open subjects where it's a bit more down to your interpretation and what you consider mind bending, really, and or mind fuckery.
Yes.
But it came to me quite late in the day, this one, and was mainly down to somebody mentioned it on a Quick Draw episode. Mark Reed from Creative Psychopaths picked it for one of his choices. I forget which one it was, but I decided to go for Eraserhead from 1977. So, directed by David Lynch, starring Jack Nance, Charlotte Stewart, Alan Joseph, Jean Bates, Jean Lang, Judith Ann Roberts, and Lauren Neer. Synopsis for Eraserhead. Henry Spencer tries to survive his industrial environment, his angry girlfriend, and the unbearable screams of his newly born mutant child. Now, if that's not a synopsis that really makes you want to watch a film, then I don't know what is. That, I wouldn't need a trailer, and I wouldn't, necessarily need to know anything else about this film. That would pique my interest just from that. So if you haven't seen Eraserhead, then obviously you need to go and watch it, just based on that synopsis. This was my first sort of delve into the back catalogue of David Lynch. Back when I was sort of 14, 15, I got a television in my bedroom, and Channel 4 over here used to show a lot of films at sort of 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening. And they were usually quite interesting films. I saw things like From Dusk Till Dawn, Angel Heart, Scum, films like that were very sort of, or relatively sort of provocative and, interesting and out there. And this was one of those films. This was one of the films sort of late night on a Sunday night. I had no idea what this film was or what it was about. No idea who David Lynch was. It was pre sort of internet days, so it's not like you could just look up and see. To this, and it was a real eye opener. This is probably the first sort of film of its kind that I ever saw, and it just fascinated me. And it was a long time again before I watched it. Once I started getting a bit more, into cinema, and then again, it was a long time before I watched it again, just for this podcast. But a little bit of background about Eraserhead. So it was made over 6 years. It was shot full sort of guerrilla style. They shot till they ran out of money, and then when they got more money, they started shooting again. They even going to the lengths of going to, where they were sort of developing film and editing films and things like that, and grabbing scraps of film just to film a little bit more. while a lot of the people, a lot of players, the cast and the crew, were working at the American Film Institute, it had a budget of 100,000, which I think even for 1977, it looks incredible.
Absolutely.
I know it's shot in sort of black and white. That's probably going to hide, a little bit of that, but it looks so amazing. The legendary Catherine E. Coulson was effectively a sort of assistant director, best known for playing Log Lady in Twin Peaks and being absolutely one of the most heartbreaking parts of Twin Peaks: The Return. She was actually married to Jack Nance, and in an interview, she said the worst thing about the film was having to maintain Jack Nance's hair for 6 years. Keep back combing it and ensuring that that there was consistency across those 6 years. Lynch has remained sort of reasonably sort of tight-lipped about the film, and its inspiration, although obviously it's clearly sort of based on his own fear and anxiety about fatherhood. It's quite clear.
He's famously tight-lipped about a lot of his films, just absolutely refusing to explain, when people ask him, what is this about? Yeah. Because he wants the audience to put themselves into it, to come up with their own interpretations of things.
Yeah. And I think, but then, I think this is, out of all of his films, I mean, it's like, there's a few that I haven't seen, like The Straight Story, which is probably his most sort of quote-unquote normal film. But I would say it's probably his most relatable film, despite its dark nature and its sort of weird imagery. And it's very charming as well. I think, again, despite all of that dark nature, it's a really charming film. There's some really horrible bits in it, obviously. And actually, Stanley Kubrick actually told him on the set of The Elephant Man that this is his favourite film, and was even cited as an influence for Hans Rudy Giger, who did the original concept drawings for the alien in Alien.
I could see that, especially the baby that they created. That's another thing that it's very difficult to find the quote unquote real explanation for how they made that. There are a lot of rumors about what it is and what it's made from.
It's apparently a rabbit or something.
Yeah, I had heard a horse fetus or a calf fetus, possibly. But it's, I think it's just a puppet primarily, but it may have like organic bits on it. Certainly, it definitely looks organic. They succeeded in that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine we're skipping quite a bit to the end, but once it's sort of unbandaged, that was maybe some kind of real parts of animals and things like that.
Sure.
But I mean, that's a fairly common practice, especially back in the day. Famously, the facehugger from Alien was bits of fish and meat and offal and stuff like that. So it's not an uncommon practice. Although I did see a great review on Letterboxd. I think the person gave it 3.5 stars, and their only sort of wording in the review was, "The baby looks like an AirPod." Which is very true.
Yeah, shape-wise, yeah. Or, more accurately, AirPods look like the baby from Eraserhead.
Well, yeah, maybe that's where they drew
Which came first
from. So what's your sort of view on Eraserhead? Is it a film that you mentioned that you saw it about 15 years ago?
Something like that. I watched it one night after my kids were asleep, by myself, in the dark, which is not how I would recommend watching this film, unless you really want to creep yourself out. I don't know if I had not realized. I mean, I had heard about this movie. It was legendarily this artistic film. And so I wanted to see it. I was very curious about it. And I had not heard about or known that the sound design in this film is so unnerving and disturbing. And I think it's what gives it a very ominous tone. But because of that, and because I saw it in the dark, my first time, I was just like, oh, this is dark and weird and I don't really need to see this again. But rewatching it yesterday, you realize that it's got a lot of really funny bits in it. Like particularly Mary's dad.
Yes.
And it is just sunny friendliness that seems completely out of place.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you pick up the music there because, I mean, on the soundtrack even, because obviously when you're watching stuff for the podcast, you do tend to have that bit more of a critical eye, or, you're listening or you're looking for certain things. And something I'd not picked up on is that it's like this sort of industrial sort of thrumming that is just there through the whole film. It does not let up. Obviously it rises and falls at different points, but it's there constantly through the film, even in the quiet moments. It's just there, and it just the whole of the soundtrack just pounds your senses and just even making me shudder now.
Yeah.
But it's just this, you're just plopped into this world as well. This sort of industrial post something world. It's not quite post apocalyptic, but you have this sort of feeling that society sort of crumbled to a certain degree, and it's a little bit sort of pre-Mad Max, I suppose. And this great industrial landscape, the railroads, factory buildings. And then you get this sort of, like you say, this little family home and this normal-ish sort of family to begin with, Mary's mum and dad and grandmother that just live in this little homestead in the middle of this sort of industrial wasteland.
I love the bit, speaking of funny, the bit where Mary's mother helps Grandma to toss the salad. Grandma's literally just sitting there unresponsive the entire film. And she puts the bowl in her lap and holds the spoon, holds her hands over Grandma's hands on the spoons to toss the salad around, and Grandma's just sitting there. Puffing on her cigarette that the mom has lit for her.
I don't think she's even puffing on the cigarette. It's just slowly sort of
sitting there burning
away. Yeah.
But and it's very heightened.
Yes.
Both the world and the way that people behave in it is heightened, which is, the heightened behavior is pretty normal for a David Lynch movie, with the exception, perhaps, of The Straight Story and The Elephant Man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a classic sort of Lynch film. We get no exposition, so we don't know. We're not told what's going on. You've got to sort of figure it out for yourself, which is always, very sort of disconcerting when it comes to films, and especially something like this, because before we get into that industrial landscape, we are literally just, you get this sort of this man who is just pulling levers. And Henry's sort of head appears, and there's these, I suppose they're meant to be sperm, and it's meant to be, my assumption is that this is the conception of the child, or this is his memory of the conception of the child, or how Henry's sort of visualizing it. And then before, we are then literally sort of birthed into the real world from this dream. You have this sort of opening, and the camera zooms towards it, and it's all very on the nose sort of.
Is it on the nose though?
Well, maybe once
I didn't get it the first time.
Maybe once you've watched the film and you go back to it, because that's once you sort of.
The second time it's much more clear that you're seeing this sort of visualization of a sperm, and you see the man next to the window throw a lever and the sperm sort of shoots off into the darkness, and that's, the conception, but it's not 100% clear, who this man is by the levers. What's the significance of him sitting by a window, one of which, like some of the panes are broken. What's the significance of this sort of tiny planet, I guess, we're looking at?
Yeah.
Is that the world inside Henry's head? What's the significance of the radiator and the lady in the radiator?
Well, that's something I've definitely not figured out. I can't even begin to sort of interpret what that means. I mean, there's a one point, near the beginning of the film, as he's sort of walking home and he steps in a puddle and then he puts his sock on the radiator. And so whether that's got something to do with it, I don't know. I mean, it could be I don't know. There's probably quite...
And why does the lady in the radiator look like that?
Yes. Yes.
Why is she dressed like a little, 1950s housewife, but she has these growths on the sides of her face?
Yeah.
Why does it make Henry so happy when she stomps on the little sperm things that fall onto the stage?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wonder if maybe she's, I don't know, like his guardian angel or something.
Possibly.
But
possibly.
I think he only sees her when he's dreaming.
Mm.
'Cause it seems like he only sees her after he starts falling asleep while he's staring at the radiator.
Yeah.
Because the radiator's right next to his bed. Mm-hmm. So it's a little difficult to tell. What's symbolic? What's a dream? What's reality?
And that's it. And I think, with Lynch, it could be one or the other or all three all at once. It could be anything. It could just be, what he's seen in his dream. Lynch talks a lot about his dreams and his interpretation of dreams and how he tries to sort of mimic them on film. And I think most of the time he sort of gets, everything feels like that. Everything feels like a dream in the vast majority of Lynch's work. You do feel that you're just moments from waking up in a lot of his stories. But to cover Henry and Jack Nance as Henry Spencer, Jack Nance is visually such an interesting actor. I don't think he's great at sort of delivering lines. He's almost comes across as a very sort of Charlie Chaplin, sort of Buster Keaton, sort of silent cinema sort of vibes to him. Again,
he has a good physical presence.
Yeah. And I think, you're probably not going to get a better actor for this particular role because he plays it so well. I mean, if you're playing it on and off for 6 years, then you're going to be quite sort of invested in that character, I suppose.
I mean, he's primarily called upon to look and act anxious, which he's excellent at.
Yeah, he's got definitely.
And honestly, I'm not 100% sure if his delivery is his own voice or if he's kind of imitating David Lynch. David Lynch has a very distinct, kind of nasally delivery, and it feels like Jack Nance is at least imitating the pattern, if not the tone exactly.
Yes, yeah. I think that there have been sort of people who worked on the film that said that the Henry character is very much sort of based on David Lynch, because obviously they were all very sort of close at this point, or certainly Nance and Lynch and Catherine Coulson. They described themselves as being like a family at this point because they were working together for 6 years. So I think that's definitely possible that it's the character of Henry is based and sort of imitated from David Lynch. He's got this sort of room, this apartment, I suppose, or bedsit, or whatever you want to call it, which seems to basically consist of a bedroom and and a bathroom.
Studio apartment.
It's just bizarre. Basically looks out to a brick wall, which, everybody wants to see.
Yeah.
He's got pictures of nuclear bombs on the wall. And this sort of odd, again, it sort of speaks to this thing of birth and children and everything. He's got this sort of nesting material around the room, bottom of the radiator and in the corners, even before the baby is, revealed to be.
Yeah, that's really odd.
Yeah, it's very bizarre.
It's like these twigs and tumbleweedy looking piles of stringy moss and whatnot, both in front of the radiator and on top of his dresser and on the nightstand.
Yeah.
It's like he's got a little tree growing out of the nightstand.
I mean, it surprised me actually because I've not long recently rewatched Twin Peaks: Return, the latest sort of series of that, and how many nods there are to this film in that series as well. With the like you say, the twigs and the dirt and stuff sort of come up, and the look of it is very much like the sort of post Red Room scenes in The Return as well. And yeah, we touched on it earlier. We get to this point where we meet Henry's girlfriend and her family, the ex-family as they're credited, which is great. And yeah, this sort of reasonably chirpy old man with his dodgy knees.
Yes.
Who has to be calmed down by his equally bizarre wife. And their even more bizarre chicken dinner, which we have to talk about because I didn't remember this. This is one of the parts of the film.
How did you not remember this?
Completely forgot about this part. But yeah, these man-made chickens.
Yeah.
That Henry is asked to carve, and quite fittingly asks, "How do you carve a chicken that's the size of a fist, basically?"
Mm-hmm.
To which he does, and then this blood starts pouring out, and Mary's mother has some kind of orgasm at the table.
Some kind of fit. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know that I would. I don't know. I think maybe it starts out pleasurable, but then she like screams and runs out of the room, and her daughter, Mary, runs after her to help her.
It's all very disconcerting, though. That whole scene, and then her mother reveals that that Mary was pregnant and that she's had the baby that's at the hospital. And then she starts sort of nuzzling Henry's neck in another weird sort of quasi-sexual thing.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's Lynch, so there's going to be, there's a certain degree of horniness to most of Lynch's work.
But yeah, the mom is interrogating him, demanding to know if they've had sexual intercourse. And of course, he's not comfortable just saying yes to his girlfriend's mother, and he just says, I love her very much. And, we've been close, and then she gets in and starts nuzzling his neck. And he's just sort of panicking, like, Mary.
As you would.
Help,
as you would.
Rescue me.
But yeah, I mean, that's another great point of the Jack Nance performance, I think, is that not that you wouldn't be awkward in that situation, but the character is very socially awkward, and I think that just heightens the tension within the film, because it is just, nobody likes to feel awkwardness in a social surrounding.
Right.
Or anxious or anything like that. And it's just... Yeah. So
this
bizarre.
is a man who has difficulty knowing how to conduct himself in ordinary interactions. So when things get weird, he has no idea how to respond whatsoever.
Yeah. But then obviously we're introduced to the baby.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of described as the baby.
Now you had said something interesting, that this recent rewatch was the first time since you had children that you watched this movie. How did you feel about the baby this time around compared to the first time?
Well, I think it just, like a lot of films, and seemingly, especially horrors, I had that with Pet Sematary. You know, once the first time I watched that post having children, it completely it affected me in a completely different way, and this does as well, because you're quite sort of, you know, my first watching, I remember being really sort of, you know, gassed and sort of put out at this thing, and just kind of sort of recoiling, just thinking that this is just absolutely horrible. And this time around, it was like, you know, it's a, you know, it looks like an AirPod, but it's, you know, it's a baby, and, you know, although it's in a very weird situation, everything else, it's, you know, you've got to think, well, that's his, you know, that's their child, and you're not sort of seeing it in that lens anymore. And, you know, it really plays to those real sort of anxieties that you have as a new parent of, is the baby well? Is the baby, you know,
Is this normal?
Is this normal? Yeah, you know, and obviously, you know, none of the, you know, the vast majority of this film, as pertains to the baby, is not normal. You know, if a baby was born with significant kind of physical defects and things like that, then it wouldn't just be swaddled and left on top of a set of drawers. You know, it would be cared for at the hospital and everything else.
Right.
But, you know, despite that, it's, you know, and when your baby gets sick for the first time, when your first child gets sick for the first time, it's genuinely, you know, one of the most sort of stressful and concerning parts of being a parent, because it's the first time that it's happened, and you're very worried and everything else. And it's just, you know, it's that, I think that was the point in the film this time around where I was like, oh my God, you know, when he says, oh my God, you are sick. And suddenly, you know, it switches, and the baby is just sort of covered in pustules and stuff coming out its mouth, and its crying's changed, and everything else. Then that was the first point, and I was like, a bit like, oh my God, you know, this is getting a bit, you know, those concerns that you have, you know, for some people they're very major concerns, and some people they're very minor things, and the things that you just sort of think about once and you let it go. Some people can't, you know, necessarily do that, but when a baby's sick or got a cold or anything like that, your senses are heightened. You know, what if the cold's going to affect its breathing, and all these kind of things that just go through your head. And
Right.
it's almost like Lynch sort of puts those onto the screen.
Yeah.
You know, and a baby not stopping crying, and just the emotional and the physical pressure that it puts on parents when a baby is not sleeping, or a baby is unwell, or a baby is not allowing you to recharge.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely get that. It was interesting watching it again this time, that I felt like, well, you know, yes, the baby looks different, but at least at first, this baby's making typical baby noises. You know, speaking of the sound design, they do an excellent job. This sounds like a baby. The weird sort of little gurgles and hums and just various little vocalizations that babies make. And Mary's really over the top about it. It's like, this baby is not that loud, and she's freaking out like it's screaming all night long. You know, saying she's just desperate to get a night's sleep. But I mean, I empathize with that. I had a kid who was a difficult sleeper, as the euphemism goes, which meant that she was waking up, you know, she'd go from waking up once every 2 to 3 hours to every 2 hours to every 1.5 hours to to the point where I was just losing it
Yeah.
the subsequent day.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Just because, you feel like you can't with your first baby especially, you feel like you shouldn't ever put the baby down and leave it alone in a room for a few minutes while you go to the bathroom or make yourself a sandwich or
Gather your thoughts. Yeah.
what have you, to take care of yourself. And by the way, yes, you can put the baby down. It'll be okay if the baby cries for like 5-10 minutes while you get your shit together.
Absolutely.
It's much better than being super stressed and freaked out and trying to hold and manage your baby at that time. Give yourself some grace.
There we go.
But-
Movie Duel podcast, not just bringing you great information about films and interesting chat about cinema. We are now giving you baby advice.
Parenting advice, yes. But I mean, this baby's not that bad. It's just like, just pick the baby up once in a while. You know?
We are sort of, I suppose, again, it comes down to that no exposition. We're sort of, we don't know how long that baby's been there now. And
Right. But it's true when he says, "Oh, you are sick," all of a sudden.
Yeah.
This baby goes from looking smooth-skinned and not terribly drooly to, sweaty and little pustules everywhere and his goo coming out of it, oozing out of its mouth, and it sounding like, but again, like a normal snorky baby, like a baby with a bad cold sounds. But it's got that same sort of distressed breathing. And it's a reflection of like how you view the baby when the baby gets sick. It's like, obviously there's something horribly wrong and we should take it to the doctor and make sure that this kid is okay.
Yeah.
And doctors will tell you they would rather you bring it in, that you're paranoid and you bring the baby in with something that you're wondering about than not. But
But that doesn't seem to be an option here in this world at all.
right.
Really.
It's not an option. Taking the baby to the doctor does not seem to be an option once this baby is home from the hospital. It's just, but I mean, it does kind of make me, I don't know. It makes me wonder, is he just, it comes off a little, I don't know. I think it is, primarily anxiety over being a parent, and like an obsessive ableist thing that a lot of parents do that they don't even think about is wanting a healthy baby and saying, when people say, "Oh, do you know if it's a boy or a girl?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't care as long as the baby is healthy." And it's like, sometimes you don't get a healthy baby. Sometimes you get a baby who has, some sort of disability or chronic condition or what have you.
Well, apparently that was a lot of inspiration because this is Lynch's first child, which I believe was Catherine Lynch, his daughter.
Maybe he's got several. So.
His firstborn was born with a club foot, which is apparently, again, an inspiration. Obviously, that's a club foot's completely different to shiny, gooey AirPod baby, but. That's
some sort of chronic disease, perhaps.
But yeah, it's fascinating to sort of that you say that, because obviously that is apparently an inspiration that was drawn on by Lynch.
Yeah, you have to come up with a new normal. What's normal for you? What's normal for your baby? And you have to figure that out, and it's terrifying. As a parent to have to navigate that. You have that anxiety and that paranoia is just there anyway, isn't it? With a baby that's perfectly healthy. It's like the extent that you go to in just preparing a bottle and making sure that everything's sanitary. There's not a germ within half a mile of you while you're preparing this bottle. Right.
Just the care that you go to in making sure that that's so. Is just, and then you doubt yourself. Did I touch that? I need a new bottle. I need to start a fresh one, or whatever it is, and sanitize and everything. It's just incredible, just the effect that it has on you, and how your life changes when you become a parent. It's never the same. Never
there's
the same.
Pre-kids and there's after-kids. And
exactly. So it is.
It definitely is not the same. I mean, you can get some of that back as they get older and a little more self-sufficient. You can have a little more time to yourself or time with your partner. But it's not the same. It's not the same. There is going to chronically be a block of your brain devoted to your kids, no matter how old they get.
But we're getting very, very sidetracked now with parents. So
We're getting way into the weeds here.
we need to...
We haven't even gotten to the sexy neighbor.
No, my next note is sexy neighbor.
That's what she is in my... I don't have a name on here. I just have sexy neighbor.
She's actually credited as beautiful girl across the hall.
Yes.
Which, again, a staple of David Lynch is this sort of a very attractive, almost femme fatale looking woman.
Yeah, she is very film noir, femme fatale sort of look.
You find very much in most of Lynch's work, which I suppose is there to represent that sort of escape from parental life and the desire to have something more, I suppose. She's very much there to be...
There's something of your own.
Yes, exactly. And then... that's a very vivid memory of the scene where he goes over to her apartment and they sort of get kinky. And they just sort of drop into this pool very slowly, and her hair is just sort of floating.
This is at his apartment.
Was it in his apartment?
Because at first she's looking over at the baby on the on the table.
Of course it is. But that's one of the scenes that I really remembered from the first time watching it, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I was a horny teenager.
Well, not everyone has you would call it a paddling pool in the middle of their bed.
No, that's true. That's true. And then,
full of who knows what that is.
And you mentioned her earlier, the lady in the radiator, which is just, again, typical Lynch. This film has everything that Lynch will become famous for. A musical piece just randomly dropped in which she's singing, in heaven everything is fine.
Yes.
And stomping on semen, I suppose.
I think it's supposed to be sperm. It's this little wiggly thing that looks like a piece of intestine, but with a blob on the end of it.
Sperm, sorry, not semen. And then we get this sort of extended a dream sequence, I guess, with...
where you get the name of the movie, yeah. Yeah,
exactly. Eraserhead, sort of constantly fidgeting with the rail and, again, plays into that sort of anxiety. And, and another fascinating piece from earlier on in the film that I'd not picked up before, actually, was because I remember sort of noticing, how he's very sort of ordered in his life, and you get the impression that Henry likes his routines, and he's very sort of ordered in his room, although it's very sort of bleak and grey and everything else. It's neat, it's tidy, but, aside from his sort of nesting material around the edge of the room. But then he's got this blanket that's just covered in holes that doesn't really make sense, and it's very noticeable. But then late as the film goes on, you see that he's sort of nervously picking at the blanket, and that's where the holes have come from. But yeah, you get this... So his head comes off. It's picked up by a boy in the street.
Yeah. He's envisioning the baby's head coming out of his suit, pushing his own head off of his body. And then this kid picks it up.
Then that's taken to a factory where it makes pencils. They make pencils from his head.
I think they have the pencils, but they use his brain for the erasers.
Use the brain for the erasers, that's it. I mean, it's just so surreal. And again, like I said, this was the first time I've seen anything like this. 14, 15-year-olds, and this just blew my mind. This whole section is just incredible. And you think $100,000, that head looks pretty incredible.
It does. It looks surprisingly good. It looks, I would say it looks at least as good as the Schwarzenegger head in Total Recall does. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it looks great. Somebody put a lot of time and work into that. I mean, the thing I love about that sequence is, again, bringing up like unexpected humor, is after the boy picks up the head and he brings it to this building, there's a man at a desk who starts frantically punching a buzzer over to his right to summon somebody, and finally this big man comes out of the office behind him and says, "Okay, Paul." Like, I get it. You need me to come out here. And Paul points at the kid with the head, and the big man looks pleased. You know, he looks very pleased that this boy has brought him this
Random
quality head. I don't know. But again, I thought that was very amusing, that little bit with just a very human interaction where someone's exasperated at someone else's impatience for their presence.
But then we get to the very depressing conclusion of this film, in which Henry kills his baby.
Yeah.
Which
I'm not sure that's what he's trying to do at first, but it seems like he goes with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, you know, watching this pre-children, obviously it's a very disturbing scene, but this time around it did really bother me, and it went a lot deeper into my sort of psyche, which is obviously going to be natural, but it is just horrible. I think it is, as with anything, it's a sound. You mentioned the sound design for the baby, you know, in terms of it crying and everything else, and that just adds to just the pure sort of horror and how disturbing that moment is, because the sound is just so visceral and so real and just horrid.
The baby is very clearly in distress.
Yes, yeah, and it's just, yeah, it really, really bothered me this time round. And I mean, Lynch, you know, he's not well known for happy endings or anything like that, or even endings that are maybe sort of conclusive. But
I mean, it doesn't look like, at least at first, it doesn't look like he's doing anything too horrible. It looks like he's just trying to cut the bandages off the baby to see what the baby looks like underneath.
Yeah.
And you don't find out until he finishes.
Yeah.
I mean, but while he's doing it, the baby's in obvious extreme distress, but he continues on. And it's not until he finishes that the bandages sort of crack open and reveal just the baby's organs inside. The bandages were the baby's body. Yeah. You know? And he just stares at it for a while and then stabs an organ in the middle. He just sort of picks one that looks important and stabs it. They don't look like human organs.
No. But that aside, and to sort of maybe wrap up a little bit, I still think this is an incredible film. A very important film. Obviously, it started the world on the journey of David Lynch and, you know, what the filmmaker that he would become.
Set the tone.
Certainly set the tone. For sure. Yeah.
It's one that he pretty well stuck with.
You know, and he's not for everybody, David Lynch. You know, some people will not have a desire for, you know, for the kind of film that he makes. But this, you know, despite its very dark subject matter and tone and everything else, I think it's probably, you know, aside from The Elephant Man and presumably The Straight Story, like I say, I haven't seen that, this is probably one of his more accessible films.
Now that's an odd thing to say. I don't know if I would agree with that.
But no, in terms of, you know, being able to sort of know what it's about, I suppose, and sort of get an inkling of what it's about.
Yeah, the themes are pretty clear.
Yeah.
In this movie, you know, the fears of parenthood and commitment and social interactions, various kinds. I think that's very clear. But actually figuring out what's going on, who's the man with the levers, who's the lady in the radiator, what's real, what isn't? Is the sequence with the neighbor a fantasy? Does the neighbor not even ever come over? Is that all in Henry's head? Does Henry kill himself at the end? Is that what that means when he goes and is embraced by the lady in the radiator?
Well, I actually have a theory about the lady in the radiator, but it's incredibly crude.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay. So, imagine, let me take you to American Pie and tube socks. Yes. Used as a...
She is the personification of his tube sock?
No. But, maybe a teenager might use a tube sock to perform a certain act of self-pleasure.
Keep things tidy.
Yes. So maybe Henry used his sock at some point. And then when his sock gets wet, he puts it on the radiator, which will drip down. And so that's where the sperm comes from. In the lady in the radiator.
Oh, interesting.
It's a bit of a stretch.
It doesn't really explain who she is, though. It explains the sperm falling on the stage, but...
Yeah. But maybe, I don't know. I mean, she's very sort of moon-cheeked.
My theory is she's sort of his guardian angel.
Yeah.
Maybe. Or an angel sort of looking down on him, trying to keep his spirits up. I don't know. Maybe she's stomping on the sperm to keep Mary from getting pregnant again.
Possibly. Well, I like to think she's the physical manifestation of his wank sock. We'll leave it at that. And on that note, is there anything that you would like to add about Eraserhead before we move on?
I think we've pretty much covered it. It's a very strange movie, and despite the level of detail we've gone into talking about it, I would, if you're willing to watch something that's a little more experimental and less of a straightforward narrative, I would recommend it just for the cinematography, the sound design, and just supporting more unusual filmmaking. Less formulaic.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, we shall take a short break and we'll be back in a moment. Okay, so welcome to the intermission. This is part of the episode in which I ask my co-host a random question, a question they've not prepared for, and get their honest first answer. So, Nicole, are you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. So I took a bit of time earlier today to stalk your Letterboxd account.
Okay.
And listed on your Letterboxd account are your favourites, or 4 favourites, which are... It's a Wonderful Life, The Host, Howl's Moving Castle, and Mandy. Now, the fate of the world lies on you erasing one of these films from existence. Which one would it be? Gone forever. You can never watch it again. I think I might have Jamied Nicole here.
Yes. If I 100% had to. Oh, man. It would come down between Mandy and The Host. Just because It's a Wonderful Life is my favorite film of all time. So there's no getting rid of that. I watch it every year. And Howl's Moving Castle is a major comfort film for me. Just even the opening chords of the soundtrack to that film.
Shamefully, the only one of those I've seen is It's a Wonderful Life.
Wow. just the opening chords calm me down, no matter how anxious or upset I may be. So between Mandy and the host, I mean, Mandy, I was blown away at the whole approach and atmosphere and performances in that film, and just the sheer gusto of everyone involved. And then, but the host is like this landmark of Korean New Wave cinema, and Bong Joon-ho and his famous blending of tones and, you know, comedy and drama and pathos and suspense, and I think the creature still looks good even now. I think the effects hold up. I think it's a great story.
I've seen clips of the host, and I must say it does look pretty good still.
Yeah. I have to get rid of one of them. I mean, I guess Panos Cosmatos has only gotten to make 2 films. Bong Joon-ho has made several more than that, so I guess get rid of the host.
Get rid of the host, okay.
And he can make another one. Give him at least the budget for that, and let him make something else.
Well, I mean, if it helps, it was an equally difficult choice for me, because my 4 favourites listed on Letterboxd obviously changes all the time, but Jaws, The Wicker Man, Seven, and JFK.
I know which one I'd get rid of out of that.
Go on then, which one?
Oh, JFK and Heartbeat.
I love it. It's one of my favourites. Well, obviously it's one of my favourites because I just told you that. But, you know, very much in the way that you say Howl's Moving Castle is a comfort film to you. JFK is to me, I remember it being like one of the only VHSs I had at my mum's when we used to go and stop there at the weekend. So I watched it. I was fascinated by it. And Jaws, pretty much the same. The Wicker Man I came to a lot later. But unfortunately, it'd probably have to be Seven for me.
Okay.
Out of those 4. But there we go. It wasn't. I'm glad I stumped you on that one, because you're normally reasonably unstumpable.
That's a tough question. Mm-hmm. That is a tough question.
That would have been. Imagine if I'd have saved that for Jamie. That one. I'd have still been sat here 3 days later, I think.
I mean, I just had to go with pure numbers on that. Because literally, Panos Cosmatos has made Beyond the Black Rainbow and Mandy, and that's it. And I love both of those movies.
Like I say, I've said before about many films, Mandy's one of those ones that sort of sat languishing on my watch list for a while. But I know it has a lot of love, and I know I need to be in a right frame of mind to watch it. Yeah,
that is one to watch at night in the dark.
Yeah.
But with your mind wide open, and it's a good ride.
Okay. But yeah, there we go. That's the end of the intermission. We'll head back to the main podcast. Thank you very much, Nicole. Obviously, we're on to your choice, Nicole. So what, obviously you mentioned Holy Motors.
Holy Motors.
Earlier.
I looked at, I thought briefly about Tenet. I thought briefly about things like The Endless and Something in the Dirt.
The Endless.
Benson and Moorhead's films. I came very close to choosing Primer, which is a time travel film that absolutely does not hold your hand and involves many charts and diagrams to understand it properly and the sequence of things that's going on. But given the spectacular implosion of Shane Carruth, I thought I would leave that out. I've spoken about him at length on my previous podcast when we did an episode about Upstream Color. So I didn't want to go back over that territory And so the one that I did choose is more fun, question mark. And the film I chose was Triangle from 2009. So Triangle is directed by Christopher Smith. The summary is already off at the beginning. It says 5 friends set sail. It's actually 6 people setting sail. And their yacht is overturned by a strange and sudden storm. A mysterious ship arrives to rescue them. And what happens next cannot be explained. So this movie is written and directed by Christopher Smith and stars Melissa George, Joshua McIver, Jack Taylor, Michael Dorman, Henry Nixon, Rachel Carpani, Liam Hemsworth, and in smaller roles, Emma Lung and Brian Probetz. So this movie, the first time I watched it, I went in 100% blind, which is a fantastic way to go into it. So I would strongly recommend, if you've ever thought about seeing this film, go do that first and then come back. Because this film doesn't really reveal its nature until about 42 minutes in or so, when it starts to loop.
Yeah.
And the yacht shows up again. The people waiting to be rescued show up again.
Yeah.
And
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it starts off, you very much feel that it's and even just looking at the synopsis for this film and the cover and everything else, it very much looks like it's going to be a sort of slasher film.
yes,
Or a hack and slash kind of horror.
looks like a slasher film on a ship.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not what this is. I mean, there are certainly slasher elements to it.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
certainly a lot of killing. Many people get killed more than once.
Yeah. And many seagulls.
Yes, many seagulls. So the primary thing that I really caught on to this time that we'll, I think, get into more detail in, is that this isn't 4 loops in this movie. If you're counting like the number of Jesses running around at any given time, it's not really 4 loops, but 1 that finishes at the end of the film.
Yeah.
Or rather, it's sort of 4 smaller loops contained in one bigger cycle.
Yeah.
Because various things need to happen that don't happen in every part of the loop.
Yeah.
Some of them are different in various ways. But then the whole thing starts over again, and you know that all of those elements are going to happen again exactly the way that they did before.
Yeah.
So was this your first time seeing this movie, or?
This is my second time. The first time, it wasn't long after it came out. I remember, I believe I rented it from Blockbuster or one of its a similar style, rental store. And I remember really liking the film, but there was so much I'd forgotten about it. I remember, obviously I remembered there was a time loop and that it was her that was doing the killing in the end and all that sort of thing. But I just forgot. So especially, it was quite jarring that how quickly we did get into that. And I always thought remembered it being much more of a twist at the end than it was, but we very much sort of get into that pretty quickly into the film.
Right.
But I enjoyed it as much as I did the first time, for sure. It's a very very interesting film.
It's definitely rewarding on a rewatch. When you know what's going to happen, the very start of the movie makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
Because she's behaving very strangely until the part where she falls asleep on the small boat, the sailboat. And up until that point, she's almost sleepwalking, it seems like, and behaving very oddly. And then after that, she's sort of fresh and normal and fine. And that's where the memory loss happens, is out on the yacht. And we never find out why this is happening, or at least we're not 100% sure why.
No. I mean, I think where the confusion probably comes is the rest of the people on the sailboat is where they sort of come into it, because obviously whether it's the right time to sort of skip to the end, but obviously the suggestion is that she dies in the car crash, and then that's the only bit for me in this film that was really, I couldn't understand where those 5 people come into it.
Right, yeah. For me, that part is odd because she, at that time, we discover, near the end of the film, she's in a car crash, but she's both driving and she has a version of herself dead in the trunk of the car.
Yes.
And so they, the people at the crash scene find the body that was in the trunk. She's wearing that body's wearing a patchwork dress that we see at the very beginning. And she, dressed differently, is suddenly outside of the car crash. She's just standing on the road, uninjured, looking at it. And so it's, is that her soul? And this whole thing is a journey of her soul trying to work through some stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's before moving on to the next plane or whatever. I think that's the most likely explanation, given the mythology involved.
There's definitely a suggestion that obviously the taxi driver is some manifestation of death, and he's taken her where she needs to go and all that sort of thing.
Right.
For sure.
Well, and there's references to it in the film, in the name of the ship. The name of the ship that that they go on this sailboat journey. She and 5 other people, they go on the sailboat. The owner of the sailboat has been coming into the diner where she works and invited her to come along. Yeah. And, there might be like a hint of romantic interest there. And they get into a storm. The sailboat capsizes, and they're sitting on the hull of the capsized boat, and this big steamship arrives out of the mist. and it's called the Aeolus. And Aeolus in the mythology is recounted by Homer in the Odyssey and the Iliad. Aeolus was the king of a particular island, and he gave Odysseus a bag of containing all the winds except one, so that the others would be contained and the one remaining wind would blow he and his crew home. And the crew is suspicious that it's some kind of treasure, and right before they get home, they open the bag, and they get blown all the way back to Aeolus's island and have to make the journey over again.
Yeah.
Which is pertinent. But also, the son of Aeolus is Sisyphus, and he tricked Death. At some point, Sisyphus, when Death came for him, he tied him up and kept him out of the world for a while. And Ares had to come and help free Death. And at some point, Sisyphus said to his wife to not bury him when Death finally came for him, to not bury his body and not perform any sacrificial rites for him upon his death. And so when Death took him to the underworld, he was like, hey, my wife didn't do these things for me. She didn't bury my body. She didn't do this stuff for me. And Death let Sisyphus go back to punish his wife for not doing those things. And instead, Sisyphus lived out a long life afterward until old age, when Death came for him a second time.
Right.
So as his punishment in the underworld, he must roll a rock up a hill, get almost all the way to the top, and it rolls all the way back down, and he has to do it over again. So in two separate ways, it's about having to redo something as fighting against fate.
Purgatory.
Yes. And so I don't know where to start with this. It's a tricky... there are four main Jesses by the end. I think of the one as Jess Prime. So at the beginning of the story, Jess Prime is what I call the woman who initially gets on the boat, loses her memory during the storm. So it's Jess. Greg is the one who invited her on the boat. Victor is his ship hand, played by Liam Hemsworth in an early role. Greg has two friends, Sally and Downey, who are a married couple, and Sally and Downey, without Greg's knowledge or permission, have brought a single friend of Sally's to try to pair up with Greg.
Poor Heather.
Yeah, poor Heather. Heather gets the short end of the stick in this story in a big way. So during the storm, when the ship capsizes, Heather is lost. She is washed out a window and lost overboard, and that's the last we see of her until the cycle starts again. So the Jesses we see are the Jess that's involved in the ship capsizing, and the one who's initially picked up by the boat. And then she evolves into, when the first loop begins again, what I call Jess WG, Jess with the gun. She picks up a rifle and starts asserting herself and being a badass and trying to fix things. And then that evolves into Tank Top Jess, when after she gives her sweater to Sally, which we will eventually get to, because that's a scene. Oh my Lord. And then from Tank Top Jess, she evolves into what I call Jess Jacket, which is after she has like this emotional break and puts on that set of coveralls and gets what actually is the first gun.
Yes.
Because if you look, Jess with the sweater, Jess Prime, when she goes to get the gun, there's already one missing from the rack. But when she's in the coverall set and going to get a gun, the rack is full.
Yeah. There's so much detail in this film. It is pretty incredible.
Absolutely. There is so much. And it's also, the boat's called Triangle. It takes place in the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is roughly the area between the island of Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and the city of Miami, Florida, which is where the ship is out of. They sail out of Miami.
Yeah. Which it sort of answered a question that I was going to pose to you. And I did assume that was the implication. Because it's always a big annoyance for me in films, in cinema, and is that, and I didn't realise this until researching the episode before I started to watch it. I just sort of, I'll have a look at the cast, see who's in it. And obviously everybody in the cast is Australian or Australasian. New Zealand, maybe from New Zealand or whatever.
Yeah, they shot in Australia or off of Australia.
But it's like, why do they need to be American? Everybody's American in this film. It's like, I mean, from my perspective, the American accents are fine. There's no...
Yeah, I think everyone
there's
does a good job. It's not really obvious that anyone's not American.
There's no issues there, but it was just like, why do they need to be? I suppose the only reason is that, the Bermuda Triangle aspect of it, but then,
I think that's got to be it.
It just always seems a pointless decision, because there must be areas like that in Australia or New Zealand that are a bit spooky and a bit weird.
The Australian mystery spot. Yeah.
But anyway, I got that out of the way. One of my major annoyances is, as I've mentioned before on this podcast, but I'll get it out of the way now.
So there's some tricky bits in this film. There are some great details that tell you that the grand loop has happened many times. When she becomes what I call, Jess WG, Jess with the gun, is when the loop starts over. The small loop starts over, and the overturned sailboat shows up again.
Yeah.
And there's this fantastic shot. Everyone else has died. Jess is the last one left alive of the people from the sailboat.
Yeah.
And she's looking into a mirror, and she hears something. And the camera, rather than following her, backing away from the mirror and going out the door, the camera goes through the mirror.
Yeah.
And follows the mirror image of Jess out the door and out to the deck and looking over the rail. And so that's hint one that maybe that's not, I don't know if that's not the original Jess or if it's the second Jess or if that's,
Jess in the mirror, Jess.
Right, through the looking glass Jess.
Yes.
But she goes out and she looks and she sees the upturned sailboat with everyone on it, waving their arms at the ocean liner. And she backs up into the room and bumps into a phonograph player. And she bumps into it more than once. She bumps into it and then she bumps into it again. She turns around and then she turns around again. And there's this sort of stuttering effect that happens several times as she is leaving this room again. That gives you a hint that maybe we're showing bits from multiple loops.
Don't know if this is the same room, but did you clock the number of the room?
That's a different room. That's a different room. But there is a room where key events happen. That's room 237.
Very on the nose. Which
is, yes, Christopher Smith in several interviews has credited inspiration from this film from La Jetée, which was also made into 12 Monkeys, which is about a time loop. The Shining, which the interior of the ship is very reminiscent of.
Indeed.
And he mentioned Don't Look Now.
Yeah.
And then just also the idea of what if the victim in a slasher movie is also the perpetrator? What if the final girl is also the killer?
High tension.
So there's definitely a call out to the Shining in there. But that scene where it goes through the mirror is 42 and a half minutes in. So it's not at all clear what kind of movie this is. You think it's a slasher movie up to this point.
Yeah.
And then it starts to loop, and my mind was blown. I was like, oh, okay. Interesting. All right, so how is it going to proceed from here?
Yeah.
You know, my main thing with time loop movies, that is the point of most time loop movies, is how are they going to break out of the loop?
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm looking for. And then, you know, once it starts looping again, and then like a third time.
But then I think your expectation for a time loop film is that, you know, you're going to go, obviously we determine that there's now a time loop. And, you know, for most time loop films, you're probably going to go through maybe a couple of times, you know, whether it's something like a Groundhog Day or whatever, where they don't realise what's happening. So that, though, you know, you get through a couple of loops or whatever. And then they start to try and change things. But this is like first loop, she tries to try and change. She realises and she starts to try and change things, which I think for me it was very unexpected, even on the second time watching it.
Yes.
You know, she gets straight into, I'm not having this. This is, you know, I'm changing up what happened before immediately. Yeah,
you fully expect her to hide and observe.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
When the first loop starts. And to hide, you know, keep hidden from everybody so she doesn't cause confusion.
Yeah.
But right from the beginning, when her in the sweater without the gun, Jess Prime arrives with Victor and is talking with Victor in the banquet room.
Poor Victor.
Poor Victor.
No matter what she does, she still ends up killing him.
She walks in with the gun and confronts both of them.
Yeah. And
it's already, you know, this confrontation that's happening in the banquet room is happening because there's already been another iteration of Jess on the ship that's causing trouble and confusion for Jess Prime.
Yeah.
So that's how you know that there have been things before her happening. And it's part of the mindfuckery of this movie is trying to figure out where the loop starts.
Yes.
Where's the beginning? Where's the end of the thread here? And can we even find it? I'm not sure that we can.
No, not at all. You're not even consistently in that loop because the loop has already changed from the first loop. So now you're in, like you say, you're into that second loop, and you just, yeah.
They already in the first time through, they find her keys.
It's not overly complicated to follow, but you have to concentrate so hard. It's a good thing, yes. I think, in a good way, and that's not a bad point to this film. I think it is. You know, you're with it for that. You're with it for the ride, really. You know, you're invested.
And as the loops continue, things become more clear as to who's doing various things on the ship. Who told Downey and Sally to go to the theater? Who wrote that on the mirror? Who, you know, who shot Greg and when? So just various things like that become clear as you're watching, but it's much, much easier on second watch to put it all together. And I was taking extensive notes. I think it took me like 3.5 hours to watch this movie because I had to keep pausing and writing things down to make sure that I had everything in order and what was going on. Because the first time you're going through the story, when they first arrive on the ship, things are happening and you don't know why. You don't see the impetus for certain actions that happen. And you don't know why someone asks the time when they first get to the boat. They all go into this banquet room together at first.
Yeah.
And there's this whole spread laid out of fresh food. We never find out why that's there. and someone asks about the time, and Victor says something about 11:30. The clock on the wall says about 8:20, and Jess looks at her watch, and it's in sync with the clock on the wall. We don't know why that is. It's a mystery. Why would it need to be?
Well, I mean, I suppose maybe that because this is all a manifestation of something to do with Jess and her mind. You know, whether it's her own personal purgatory or whatever it is. You know, she's in tune with it, and everybody else isn't. That's the only thing I can think. Because it's like, you know, this is all set in. You know, obviously there's the connections with the name of the ship and everything else to the stories you've explained and everything, but then it's like, why a ship? Why the yacht in the first place? Why these people? And you can only assume that really that's her manifestation.
Right. Yeah. And the empty ocean liner reflects, you know, some of the stories about the Bermuda Triangle are about people coming across abandoned ships.
Yeah.
Where there's no one on board, but it doesn't look like it's been in any distress. It doesn't look like anything has gone wrong on board the ship. It's just all the people were missing.
Yeah.
So.
Do you need to be going? Yeah.
Yeah. So I shall be back. Okay. So I just had a thought that I think I have a theory. She's definitely dead. I think that Patchwork Dress Jess was the one driving the car when they got into the accident. And I'm not sure where the tank top and shorts and sweater came from. With the, like, wedge heels. It's a really odd combination, especially for a boat. When you're going on a sailboat, you don't wear heels.
I'm down for it. I'm not going to deny.
Oh, she looks good in it, but, you know.
I'm not going to deny that Melissa George looks fantastic in this film.
Yeah.
And I'm a red-blooded male, so
I'm not going to ding you for it. But I think it's because her son is, the way he's portrayed is like semi-verbal or non-verbal autistic. You know, he goes to a special needs school. She talks about how every day has to be the same, that nothing can be out of place, and that's very clear from his behavior. That when things are different from what he expects, that it's extremely upsetting for him, and he has trouble handling it.
Like seeing another version of his mum at the window.
That'd throw anybody off. But, you know, like when they hit the seagull and there's blood on the windshield and he really flips out, you know, I mean, yes, any child would be upset that there was blood on the windshield, but not necessarily to that degree. But I think because she complains about every day being the same, that's part of her punishment.
Yes.
Is that no matter what she does, she can't change the outcomes. Everything is going to unfold just the same every time, no matter how hard she struggles.
Yeah.
And tries to help herself break out of the loop. It isn't going to work. Ever.
No. And I suppose it's punishment at the end of the day, isn't it? Because obviously it's revealed in that last loop that she's not quite the doting mother that she maybe, or the doting and troubled mother that she sort of portrayed as at the start of the film, and she's really not very nice at all.
Right. I mean, the movie opens with a shot of her holding her son and you know, cradling him and telling him it's okay, it was just a bad dream, which we find out later is he witnessed her killing another version of his mother. She's dead on the floor behind her. She's like, no, mommy's fine, it's just a bad dream. But, you know, that version of her in the patchwork dress we see near the end of the film has slapped him because he spilled his paint, because he looked out the window and he saw another version of his mom. And, probably in the real world, it was some other impetus that startled him and caused him to spill his paint.
Yeah.
But she strikes him. She slaps him at one point because she's so frustrated. And she's not getting the help she needs as a single mom of a special needs kid. She's not, she should be seeing a therapist to help her out, figuring out her feelings about it and be able to deal with her child in a calm and more measured manner.
You see, my reading of it was maybe a bit more nihilistic than that, because I read it more as, obviously in the beginning that we see, that she's frustrated and tired and everything else, and that's why she's putting on a brave face, she's trying her best and working through it and everything. But I think then the impression that I got at the end was that she was just not a very nice person, rather than necessarily pushed to the limits.
Yeah, that could well be.
And that's why it was happening to her, rather than anything to do with Bermuda Triangles or anything. She was a bad person in life, and that's why she's got to relive the life as it is.
That would make sense. I read it as she was so, she had been invited to go sailing and she was so desperate to do something different and go somewhere else that she was at her wit's end trying to make it happen. But I think, she comes off as more tender at the end because she's kind of learning a lesson as these loops go on. She's pushing through all the horrible things that are happening by thinking of her son and getting back to her son. She's been through a shipwreck. She's been on this ship. Weird stuff's going on that she doesn't understand. People are treating her terribly and she's not sure why. And it's because in the story they're encountering other visions of her, but Sally's suspicious of her from minute one. The second she sets foot on the sailboat, Sally doesn't like her. Yeah. Or Sally might not even like her before she meets her, because she's got somebody else in mind for her friend Greg. But yeah, so I think it's definitely a punishment, and that ties in with the mythology and everything else. Yeah.
And it's quite, when you think about it, it's quite, a cruel one as well, because if you look at other films that are maybe taking that sort of angle of punishment, purgatory and all that sort of stuff, there tends to be just the one, maybe two loops of sort of, this is how this, even Jacob's Ladder that I mentioned earlier, he's living his life post a certain event, and, he's moving on to the next world. But this, like you say, it's punishment. So it's made even crueler by the fact that, while she's in that cycle, it's obvious that there is a cycle. It's not like the bodies disappear every time, as we see, with Sally. Is it Sally?
Yes.
Sally's body, the multiple bodies that are on the deck when she's at the end of the second cycle, I think that is. I
believe so, yeah, because it's
shotgun.
Jess with a gun before she gives up her sweater.
And the seagull and everything. So, even though she is on this perpetual cycle, and the cycles within the cycle, each time those bodies are there, they're added upon every time.
Right, and she's allowed to see that. Yes. You see the multiples of everything. You see the necklace from when she peers down through a grate in the ship, that her necklace gets caught every time and falls into this pile of dozens of necklaces. I stopped and counted every time, and it's between like 30 and 3 dozen of everything. When she writes herself a note saying if they board, kill them all, it's in her handwriting, and she writes it again to confirm that it's her handwriting. But there are dozens of copies of this note lying around. Yeah. And then when Sally's running from her, and she's not sure why, because she's not the version of herself that has stabbed Sally. That is a later version of herself. that does that.
Yeah.
But Sally doesn't know that, so Sally's running from her, and Jess follows her up to the deck, and she hears Sally crying and turns this corner, and seagulls fly up in her face for a second, but she looks, and there are dozens of dead versions of Sally in this sort of dead end on one of the decks. And that the shot comes like a little over an hour into the movie, and my jaw hit the floor the first time because it's a stunning shot. The impact is tremendous. And
absolutely,
just the horror of it hits you. You know, it's like, it's more theoretical horror when she's writing notes and it's copies of the necklace, but all these piles of Sally. Yeah. Can you imagine, you know, I'm sure this is, because it's punishment, these aren't real people. You know, they're sort of avatars set in to be part of Jess's punishment. But they're portrayed like they're real people, and the absolute horror it would be to find dozens of dead versions of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
On this mystery ship that you boarded that day. And you're wounded, you know. It's like, oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. And the seagulls play a huge part in this film as well. Obviously, they're quite sort of consistent through the film. Right.
And I mean, that's a mythological thing, too. That's a sailor's superstition, is that seabirds carry the souls of dead sailors.
Yeah.
Never kill a seabird.
And they're just being fuckers throughout this film. Goes in no end of...
Yeah, Greg brushes it off as, they think we're a fishing boat. They're going to be disappointed. But they're not, because there's going to be plenty of carrion for them to dine on between...
Plenty of Sally, yeah.
Between all the dead Sallys, between the Downies being thrown into the water.
And poor old Victor, I'm going to keep coming back to him.
Oh,
he gets the real shit end of the stick, old Victor.
Yeah.
He's just...
Young Victor, you know.
Young Victor, yeah.
Supposed to be like 18, which I believe, you know. Still baby-faced Liam Hemsworth with his crew cut.
I mean, wow. I mean, this was...
They make him look very young.
I looked this up, actually, and this was a fairly big picture. I don't know what it took sort of budget-wise and that, but I remember it being...
Oh, it was not very big here. It wasn't very big in the US.
Was it not?
No.
I remember it being, you know, relatively sort of popular, especially within sort of genre circles over here. But this was, you know, I think this was before Chris Hemsworth had made his big break as well.
Yeah, 2009 was before. I think that was the same year as the Star Trek reboot, where he played Captain Kirk's dad for like 10 minutes.
No, that was later than that, wasn't it? Thor was 2011.
Right.
And I'm sure...
Hang on.
Star Trek was about 2012, I think. Maybe 13.
Star Trek with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, 2009. So...
Oh, right, okay. I stand corrected. Always Thor 2010 then. But yeah, I mean... Obviously, it's a mainly Australian cast, isn't it? And most of these were in a popular soap called Home and Away, which was big over here.
Did not know that.
But then I always, you know, reading up Melissa, I thought, this must have been one of Melissa George's first sort of roles. And she'd been about for quite a while, to be fair. I forgot she was in Dark City. I haven't seen that film for a long time.
Oh, gosh, was she?
She must have been very young in that.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in ages and ages and ages. I remember Jennifer Connelly being in it, but I don't remember Melissa George. But, yeah, I mean, this film in the years since definitely has become better known and appreciated in horror circles. And those of us who enjoy horror films and are trying to find like the hidden gems.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming better known and more widespread appreciation.
It's definitely that. I mean, even, you know, I remember, like I say, I remember watching it when it first came out But I remember very little about it. Like I do seem to remember it being a bit more slashery, and certainly for a lot longer than it is.
Right.
And I didn't think that sort of twist in the time loops came till a lot later on in the story. But it was quite a pleasant surprise, really, to see that starts a lot earlier. And like I say, I remember the main point that it was her who was doing it. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised with the second watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everything gets tied up. Every weird thing that happens gets explained.
Yeah.
By the end, except for the bit that, there's one body out on the road and she's another one looking at herself and, where the starting point is.
I mean, do you know what the real weird thing about this film and about Eraserhead is?
Mm-mm.
There's no X-Files connections. There is no actor connections. I mean, the obvious one really with Triangle is that season 6 episode of the X-Files called Triangle, which was set in the Bermuda Triangle. So I suppose that's the closest sort of connection we get to the X-Files. Very different kind. Well, it deals with sort of time travel and timey-wimey and loopy-loopy kind of things where they're board Mulder goes back in. I can't remember it now. Mulder goes back in time on this. They board a cruise liner. Mulder goes back in time on the same cruise liner where it's overtaken by Nazis. But Scully remains in the present, but they're crossing paths in the ship, and it's all very split screen. So it's very great, really, really well made episode and really fascinating one. And all the characters from the X-Files, so like the Smoking Man is one of the Nazis, and all the characters are sort of woven into the story. Really fascinating episode. But that's the closest I could get, other than the usual sort of David Lynchy, Twin Peaksy kind of connections, but they're going a bit even stretchier than an episode with the same name as the film that you picked.
So I get the feeling that Christopher Smith was an X-Files fan.
He obviously has a good a love for horror, and there's a lot of there's some very obvious nods, like like we mentioned, The Shining and stuff, and then there's some, like you said, that maybe not quite so obvious, but it's someone who's obviously taking the subject matter very seriously and wanting to do something that's paying homage, but also is very different. Because I can't think of another film that is like this to this degree, anyway.
Yeah. And I didn't realize so much the first time, but I think it's all or nearly all handheld camera work. There's a lot of handheld following Jess through the ship. Yeah,
absolutely.
And that gives it an immediacy.
And I mean, there are one or two sort of shaky CGI moments, even to 2009.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily detract from your enjoyment of the film. You're not sat there thinking that's maybe more of a having a podcast eye on it.
And they do a really good job of the effects that count. Like the overturned ship with the people waving for help on it doesn't look great.
No. But then, I mean, maybe that could even have been a conscious thing, because it does feel very otherworldly. Those shots do feel a bit like, you're not, you've got a skewed vision of what's going on. But it's probably more down to the budget. But
they do tremendous things with practical effects. The through the mirror shot is almost entirely practical. With like a double and moving cabinets in front of the mirror that they pull out of the way as she walks toward the mirror opening. And they just used CG to put in like the smudges on the surface of the mirror.
Yeah.
So that you can really see like where the surface is supposed to be that the camera passes through. But the Sallys, that looks amazing. None of them look like doubles with masks on.
No.
It really looks good.
although the whoever the body double was for this sort of Melissa George in the overalls,
A little too big.
a little too manly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a little Michael Myers-y. It was a little too hulking. But I think that could have also been on purpose to make it ambiguous at first as to who that figure is.
Yeah.
It would have been too obvious.
It would have been obvious. Yeah.
To make them so short. I mean, Melissa George isn't tiny, but, she's still smaller than some of the people, even with the heels. But, yeah, so, I mean, this... Is there anything that you wanted to bring up? I don't want to steamroll over you here if there's...
No, I don't think so. I think I've covered most of my notes. I ended with poor Victor. Just, yeah. Again, I keep going back to that, poor Victor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And bad haircut on the kid. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, that is bad. That's a home job for sure. For sure.
But now, what about you? Anything else you want to sort of delve into before we wrap up?
No, I think I need to go back and look at some of Christopher Smith's more recent work to see if it's come up. I really love Triangle, so I went back and I watched Severance.
Yes.
Which is 2006. And that's a horror comedy that is a lot of fun, if you like such things.
That's the with Danny Dyer where they go on the team building.
It's like a work retreat. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember enjoying that.
Before that, he did Creep, not the one with Mark Duplass, the one that takes place in the underground.
Again, I think it's quite underrated, that. I don't think it got a lot of love.
And then after Triangle, he directed Black Death with Sean Bean, which I did not enjoy. That one's...
No? Well, I thought that was good.
It was all right, but the handheld was super shaky in that, even for me. Like, I'm not one who complains about, shaky cam is terrible and I can't watch anything with it and it makes me ill or anything like that. No, I have no problem with like Cloverfield or Blair Witch Project or anything like that, but Black Death was really bad. It was really severe camera shake to it. So I had a rough time with it. Also, it was a little nihilistic for me.
Maybe that's why I enjoyed it.
So, as you might expect, things do not end well for Sean Bean.
No, of course not.
But he's directed several things since that I have not seen. I haven't seen Detour. I haven't seen Get Santa. I haven't seen The Banishing or Consecration. No. Although I've heard decent things about Consecration. I'll have to check that out. So I will look into that. He is one of the directors where I tend to keep an eye out to see what he's up to because I like Triangle so much. Because I think he really he closes the loop on it. He picks up all the loose ends and does it in what I think is a really clever and assured way.
Yeah. And I mean, to maybe start sort of rounding up the two or the two choices, for me, in terms of, I couldn't say that Triangle's a better film than Eraserhead. Eraserhead is a film that just stands, way above that.
It's a different category.
It's a different category, yeah. And I think, although it's probably not as, it doesn't delve into the mindfuckery quite as much as some of Lynch's later pictures, I think just the assault on your senses that this film has, whether it's visually, audibly, or just, within your psyche, and how it sort of affects, certainly how it affected me, again, on the third time that I'd watched it, I was thinking about it for the next couple of days. almost a week, I suppose. But I think
It sticks with you. It sticks with you.
yeah. But I think Triangle does as well. I think again, it's interestingly, really, I suppose the overall sort of, the arc of both the stories of both the films that we've picked is, about, a parent,
Yeah.
being a parent, and how that affects you and choices that you make, I suppose,
Yeah.
which is quite interesting.
And how you handle it. How you handle it when it gets really challenging.
Hmm. But it'd be interesting to see what the polls make of this one.
Yeah. I think you could say that Eraserhead is a winner in the art film category, and Triangle is a winner in the sort of mass market film category.
Mm.
I don't know. I like them both.
Yeah.
I like them both in a different way. Yeah.
Definitely. So, is there anything before we finish up? Anything that you are up to at the moment, or anything you'd like to push or promote or talk about?
Oh, no, I'm afraid my quote unquote free time has been sucked up with a lot of practical things of late, and I have not had time to update my letterbox and do my top 10 of 2023 list yet. I'm still catching up on some of the films. I haven't seen Poor Things yet. I did catch up on Saltburn recently.
Ooh.
Wow. Wow. Again, talk about one that you cannot watch with your parents or children.
No.
When I do get my letterboxd updated, I will put that out there for people to see. But until then, you're just going to have to listen to back episodes of Movie Duel, So.
Yeah. And you can also catch Nicole on our monthly roundtables over on Patreon for just $1 pound, around about that, of which we should by now have released the second one of those, I think, for February by the time this goes out. So you can listen to some of Nicole's thoughts on that as well. But until next time, Nicole, it just leaves me to say goodbye, and for Nicole to say...
Don't talk to me about my world.